Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Robert Phoenix. Yes, it's me broadcasting to you, not live from Texas today, but live from not so sunny California. I'm going to be here for the next week, and I'll be hanging out with the mater familias of the family, having a little bit of Thanksgiving turkey and celebration and all that stuff that happens this time of year. Hopefully, I can see a few friends while I'm out here as well. And I will be doing some shows, and today is one of them. And I'll probably do a show tomorrow. And if I have time, I'll do a Friday Farcast. And then on Sunday night, I'll probably wind up doing a Sunday night Astro live stream, perhaps. There's an asterisk there. And then Monday, I won't be doing a show, as that's not normally the day that I broadcast on. And then let's see, Tuesday I'm traveling. I might do a show on Tuesday though, because I'm traveling late. So we're going to get some media content here. There's a lot going on, and I plan on being in a regular, as much of a regular cycle as possible, because hey, you may as well make hay while the sun shines and while the tools are still here and available with us. So that's what's happening. As soon as I got off the plane, it got super cold. By the time last night rolled around, man, it was a serious freaking storm. I mean, it was very intense. We had some reminded me of the storms that I experienced growing up here as a kid in Northern California. We used to get extremely dramatic weather during the wintertime. Very rarely would it snow, although occasionally it would. But what we would get would be very, very cold rain, temperatures around the mid 40s, and then a lot of heavy duty wind. Last night it was a reanimation of those storms I remember as a kid. And it was interesting because when I was in Texas, and it was on, let's see, Monday, it was 70 plus degrees in Texas on Monday. So it got a little colder and a little more intense here. I'll be doing the shows a little bit later here, out of deference to my mother, who tends to sleep later than I do now. And normally I would go around 8:30 roughly in Texas, which is 6:30 in the morning here. That's not going to work. So if you're interested in the content, I'll be broadcasting anywhere between 8:30 to 9. That's Pacific Standard Time. So maybe somebody on the West Coast will actually get to be more participatory in the chat session over the course of the next few days. Anyway, let's just see if there's anybody hanging around. It's always good. All right, let's see if we got some peoples. All right, we got Isla, and then there's Fup. Hey, there's Judy and Ian and Tamara and Christine. What's going on, Christine? And let's see who else do we have here. There's the cheeky one and Mary. The gang's all here, as they say. Wait a few minutes, let the coffee percolate a little. Wait till a few other people show up and kind of get into things. I'll give you a bit of a headline. First of all, what I want to do is I want to, and I can talk about this now because I think it's worth it. I wanted to give you guys an update on what happened and what's happened with the election in Fredericksburg as it relates to the fluoride votes. So as most of you know, we challenged the vote, and we started that challenge not this past Friday, but the Friday before last. And then last Friday, they actually went through and they started the process. So I didn't have a whole lot of hope that the vote would be overturned, only because there was a pretty wide gap between what people voted for and what they voted against, right? So more people voted for wanting fluoride in the water, and after a recount, that vote stayed the same. Okay, so I didn't have a whole lot of. If it was closer, if we were talking about a difference of maybe between 50 to 75 votes, then I'm thinking, okay, well, we may have a very interesting outcome here when we recount the ballots. But that wasn't really the case. And look, this is a process. And the people in Fredericksburg, they went to the ballot boxes and they voted and they want fluoride. And that's how the game works. You know, and I can sit here and bitch and moan all I want about, you know, how they're, you know, uninformed or sheeple or whatever. And some of that may actually be true. But at the end of the day, they got off their asses and they went down to the polls. And for whatever reason, they chose the fluoride over not choosing fluoride, which I can't really fathom. I can't fathom. I mean, if there's even a scintilla of doubt about fluoride's efficacy, why would you vote for it? I mean, you'd have to look at everything that's presented against fluoride, and just with all of these people who have risked their jobs. I mean, there are dentists who have moved out of the ADA, and they still practice dentistry, but they're out of the ADA, and they've risked their jobs, and they've risked their careers, and they've risked their reputations. Why do you think they did that? You think they did it because they're nuts? You know, did they do it because they have mommy and daddy issues? No, because they're acting on the guidance of their principals, and they're risking their careers to practice dentistry because they don't agree with fluoride and they don't agree with mercury amalgams. And the two go hand in hand. You know, what about a number of other people at a very high level, extremely high level? And we had videos galore. And one of the videos has to do with a group of professionals, like really high ranking professionals. We're talking chemists and chemical engineers, very famous dentists, people that belong to the National Institute of Health, you know, people that were nominated for Nobel Prizes in science. And these are all people that came out against fluoride. Now, why would they do that? Is it because they're nuts? Is it because it's a trendy thing to do? If anything, that's not going to endear them towards their either their clients or their peers. I mean, generally speaking, you want to kind of go along with the party, right? The party says, hey, fluoride is good for you or it's not harmful for you. It's much more expedient from a professional standpoint and profitable too. So why would they do that? And so if you're somebody who's against fluoride, aren't you paying attention here? Aren't you looking at these people that are making critical career and life choices by going against the grain? Well, that just goes out the window. And then you look at the research, and the research says, hey, there's an issue here. There's a research for the American Journal of Pediatrics, just came out. It lowers IQ in children. And yet they're going to just poo-poo that and say, screw that. You know, there's a greater good. And this whole idea of the greater good is something that comes up again and again and again and again and again. And that through the greater good, it's okay if other people suffer. Through the greater good, it's okay if our immunity is compromised. It's the same argument that's used for genetically modified organisms, genetically modified food. You're people who are pro-GMO, and they're pro-GMO because it helps sustain crops in places that crops have a difficult time growing for whatever reason, drought or too much water or some sort of infestation or whatever. And so they say, okay, well, let's use these genetically modified crops because they're going to be able to grow and sustain a population, and that population can then flourish. The example that's always used is Africa. So they'll say, okay, well, you've got first world privilege. You can afford to have organic foods. These people, on the other hand, don't have the ability to have organic foods. They're barely getting by. So I'm going to take the greater good over the lesser evil. And this is how choices are made. You know, this is how choices, the greater good over the lesser evil. And it comes down to something, and the greater good, by the way, that is always moving. That goalpost is moving all the time. So the greater good comes into things like surveillance and privacy. Well, it's much, much better if we can have greater surveillance and greater privacy because it serves the greater good. Oh, so what if a few of your really important and cherished ideals around privacy and freedom and security and individualism are sacrificed? Tough shit. It serves the greater good. You know, get over it. Get over yourself. Get over your fluoride. Get over your organic foods. Get over your freedom. Get over your personal rights. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't serve the many, the hordes, the masses. And so the people that wind up saying, hey, look, I'm really concerned about my health and your health. I don't think these foods are healthy for us. I don't think our water is healthy for us. And quite frankly, I don't think having a 24/7 surveillance system is healthy for us either. Oh, get over it. Get over yourself. And I see this now being as an idea that's being perpetuated in the media. And it has to do with Donald Trump for a slightly different reason. And the reason, so what I'm seeing is like, what more do you need to know about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the, what's going on in the Ukraine and what they've done in the Ukraine, and not just them, but Romney's kid, he's in there, and John Kerry's kid is in there. It's like, let's bring up the next crop of, corrupt deep state agents, and let's make sure they get a really good start in life by getting as much money as they possibly can, by feeding off the fat of the land. And Kerry, that's part of his deal. He was promised that, no doubt. After the election, when he rolled over and laid down for fellow skull and boner George W. Bush, he can write his own ticket. He'll never come under the scrutiny of corruption, and neither with his kid or his wife or whomever is in his sphere. He's going to profit off of that. Same thing with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney ran and he, laid down and rolled over again. And Romney will never undergo any kind of scrutiny. I mean, look, and Romney's part of the Mormon Mafia. So, when was the last time you saw anybody in the Mormon Mafia do any time or crime for corruption? It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So, there's all this evidence that's out there. It's all out there. I mean, just check the box. I mean, just look around. I mean, people in the alternative media know about it, but the mainstream media will not report on it. They've basically said, no, we're not going to report on this. We're not going to. They can make a big deal out of it if they wanted to, but instead they make a big deal out of other stupid shit, like the quid pro quo thing. And it's like, come on, man. You're dealing with politics in America. You're dealing with global politics. You're like using a standard, a white glove standard, that if any kind of indiscretion has been made, right, the white glove standard will then, even if it's minor, violates that white glove standard, right? That's the standard that they're using now to hold up against the Trump administration. But that white glove standard was never there when it came to Barack Obama. The white glove standard was never there when it came to George W. Bush. It was never there, but now it's there. And then you have people who are, talking about things like democracy. Like they're doing all of this so that they can protect democracy. They're going up against Trump, and they're basically perjuring themselves and lying and crossing all kinds of lines because, oh, they believe in the American dream and they want to protect democracy, and he's a threat to democracy. It's a reframing of an issue that's just, part of the inversion effect, and it's absolutely bizarre. But what you're not getting is you're not getting the other side of the story. You're not getting the apparent truth with Hunter Biden and China and Ukraine. And it's because in a lot of ways, Trump has declared war on the mainstream media, and they're not going to help him out at all. They're going to do their very best to bury him. That's what's going to happen. But again, this is kind of what we're seeing, and it's the same sort of standard, albeit coming at it from a different POV, because, well, Trump's incurred some enemies. Let's just put it that way. But we see it. We see it with the fluoride stuff. We see it with the genetically modified organisms. We see it with vaccines. Facebook now will not allow any group on Facebook who even produces the insert information on any vaccine. You can't even put that on Facebook now. You can't do it. Facebook has put their foot down and said, no, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So we're very, and why? Because of the greater good, right? This is the reframing of everything for the greater good. And they're defining the greater good in terms that, well, I would have issue with. And I think a number of you who are probably watching this stream would have issue with as well. That the greater good could be served in a different kind of way. And the silent minority is probably not as much of a minority, nor is it as silent as it once was. And this is a problem now, and they're beginning to shut down the outlets. So they're closing the exits. I just read where Red Ice had its Facebook page taken down. And it's only a matter of time before True News over on YouTube has its YouTube channel taken down. I don't know if you guys saw the show they did last week. Oh my God, Rick Wiles went all in, man. He went all in. And for some of you, you may not like it, you may not dig it. For others, like this might be about as courageous and ballsy as it gets. And there's going to be very little in between. So again, they're starting to shut these. And it's not anything new, but it's going to happen at an accelerated rate. Because in 2020, astrologically, and we'll be talking with Jay Widener about this today when we do a show together, Jupiter is going to start to move into Capricorn. And, one of the things we know about Jupiter is it brings more of something. I mean, it can be theoretically abundant or effulgent and, all those kind of Jupiterian things that we like to associate with Jupiter, but it also brings more of whatever is coming. And man, it's going to be conjunct Saturn. It's going to be conjunct the South Node right out of the gate, right? Because the South Node is going to be around 8 or 9, 7, 8, and Jupiter's coming in with 0, 1. So this Jupiter South Node conjunction. Now, the good news is that we might be seeing with Jupiter more of the egregious excess and the overstepping of boundaries that's connected with Capricorn. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as it relates to the election, by the way. We may see more of that, and that may be a good thing. But we also may see more of just the clutching and the grabbing and the reaching for more power, more resources, and more control based on the fact that people are wanting less of it. I think they're wanting, I know some people want more government, more control. And look, I had a really interesting session with a person on Monday, which I want to talk about briefly. And it does have to do with control, and it does have to do with regulation. And I am not necessarily a free market guy, because I don't think free markets really help Johnny and Jenny on Main Street. I don't think free markets really help Main Street USA. I think free markets are really, really helpful for the globalists and the internationalists and the conglomerates. That's what I think. Now, I'm also not into over-regulating small businesses. I mean, that's what we see happen. We see small businesses have to jump through hoops in order to have a business. They set these barriers like, well, you've got to have X amount of money in place, and you've got to be able to, file your insurance is going to cost this much, and we're going to require you to go through all these inspections, and they make it very, very difficult. Whereas the super large conglomerates, big businesses, those hurdles, they don't really affect them as much because they can handle those threshold costs. Like they can handle those threshold costs. It's like, no problem, we can do this. But for somebody below a certain level, those threshold costs become barriers for them doing business. This happens all the time. So I had this client on Monday, very interesting person, and they have been involved in the theater business all their life in Texas. Their family has been involved in movie theaters in Texas all their life. And so they've done very well, as far as theaters go. But apparently now they've decided that in 2 years, there's this thing called the Paramount Act. And the Paramount Act was something that was put in place essentially to protect independent movie retailers, people that owned cinemas. And what essentially was is that if you were a movie theater, you could not go in and buy up movie theaters. They passed an act so that it kept the production houses and the production companies separate from distribution. And distribution obviously is the distribution of their material inside of a cinema, inside of a movie house. Well, that's going away in 2 years. It's going away in 2 years. And so now these movie and maybe this is just the kind of the social Darwinian landscape, and that this is where things are going anyway. People still like to go to movies, I think, for the collective experience, for the first run potential. And now movie theaters become more like your living room. You go to a movie theater, you get the nice reclinable chairs. Somebody walks up to your chair sometimes, takes your order. You get a gluten-free burger, maybe a beer, just like your living room. And your living room is becoming more like a movie theater because big screen TVs and your own reclining chairs. And pretty soon the robots will be bringing you your food from the kitchen, or maybe the robot drone will come in and bring your food from wherever, right? So that these two environments are starting to become merged with one another in an interesting sort of way. But still, here's an example of regulation, or the lack of regulation, or lack of a check and balance inside of the marketplace is going to literally destroy independent movie theaters. The independent movie chains are going to be very, very hard now to be able to have a total. So I'm not a free market guy. I am definitely into regulations that can help people start small businesses or keep family businesses going. This is where I think the libertarians kind of get it wrong a little bit. I think the libertarians, which are, dyed-in-the-wool free market people, it's like, it sounds good in theory, but in a non-competitive marketplace, how free is it? And I'm not talking about putting, it's kind of like, okay, this is the opposite. In a place like Seattle, which I covered before, with city government. Like if you work for the city of Seattle, the first thing, if you want to procure a vendor for the city of Seattle, the first thing you have to do is you have to go through, I think, a company that's run by either gay or lesbian fulfillment. There's there's this hierarchy where you got to start here, and then if you want to work with like just a regular company, that's like down here, right? So this is kind of an inversion of the regulations. Like in some areas, those regulations are really stifling. In other areas, they're actually working against independent business owners and small businesses because those regulations, number one, can cancel them out, or number two, may be so cost prohibitive that it forces them out of business. Whereas with the conglomerates, it's not as cost prohibitive. Anyway, we're going to see probably more of this with Jupiter in Capricorn, and some of this stuff is going to start to be brought out. So we're going to see it for better or worse. And we'll also see more of a land grab, and that's exactly what I was talking about with Jupiter and Capricorn and the land grab. The land grab is the grab for things like copyrights and patents and the right to do business, unchained and unfettered, and it's going to be very Wild Westy in a lot of ways. The problem is that the Pinkertons have the guns, at least at this point. So I wanted to bring it back to Fredericksburg, and I wanted to give you an update on the election and the recount. So we started the recount, and again, it was the people have spoken. They voted. They want fluoride. There you go. That's how it works. But I wanted to talk about the process, and I wanted to follow up on what happened with the recount. So one of the things, and I think Christine, who's in the chat room, will relate to this. Now, I don't believe that they said fluoride's not going to win in Fredericksburg and affected the vote count, because we had a very rigorous recounting of the votes, very rigorous. They're so rigorous it pissed the city off. But what I do believe is that there were a number of factors in play. And here they were. First factor in play was that there was an overall mindset that the system was not going to be as cooperative with us as it was for our opponents. In case in point, when I talk about the system, I'm talking about, number one, the city government, right? The governance that's involved with the city. That's number one. Number two, I'm talking about the press, which is an appendage of the city and city governance. Okay, so this is how I define the system as it relates to Fredericksburg. So what we saw, number one, straight out of the gate, was that the local newspaper was dead set against us. That they would take our money for the ads, they would run some letters to the editor occasionally, and when push came to shove, they wrote a full-page editorial against fluoride. I'm sorry, for fluoride and against our position. Now, the editorial itself could have been more even-handed and said, you know, we'd like to chime in on this, and this is what we think, and here's the pros and here's the cons. But it wasn't like that. It was sort of like, let's get out the howitzers, or let's get out the fire bombs and just level Dresden. I mean, that's what it was like. So we were swimming against the tide with the local paper, and they were happy to take our money, and they were happy to run our ads, and every now and then we got a decent story. But it was like we really we had to fight for what we wanted. You know, again, the case in point, you know, Joan wrote a very nice letter, really good letter, and they wouldn't print it. $1,500 and a full page ad later, they did. That's how the game works. That's how it works. If she lived in Fredericksburg, perhaps they might have printed the letter. Perhaps. I'm not convinced. So we were up against it. Now, in the process with the city, they were compliant in order to make sure that everything was cool and kosher and that the charter amendment went on the ballot. Now, that said, once things picked up and we went into overdrive with the campaigning, it was difficult. They made it a lot more difficult on us. As I mentioned before, Jeanette was harassed on two occasions by the local police department. Okay, pretty, you know, harassed by the local police department twice. And the guy who was kind of cool, kind of a human, blue human, came out and said, "Look, if we have to come out again, you know, we're probably gonna arrest you, or you know, something along those lines." So, well, yeah, let me. Somebody was sending me a text message. Let me rephrase that. They said that if they had come out again, that she would be reported to the county election judge, and that there would be some form of punishment for Jeanette. I don't know what that would be, and she wasn't doing anything except her democratic right to talk to people as they walked into the poll. So they came out twice. The local election judge came out 4 times. She was visited 6 times and harassed. They kind of districted the parking lot so that what they did is they funneled everybody over to this other parking lot to park, so they could go in and do their early voting. And then they said, well, you can't go over there because it's within this 100-foot radius. So they just kept gaming the system as things went along, right? So there are 2 things to this. Number one, there's the actual physical limitation that they were placing on her. Number 2, there's the metaphysical limitation where we're talking about energy. And so, you know, here comes this gravitational Saturnian field pressing down, and they're you know, what they're doing is they're defining the energetic component here. Now, I wouldn't expect them to do anything otherwise, because that's what they're supposed to do. You know, that is what they are supposed to do. That is their default position. So let's fast forward now. Let's talk about the recount. And I don't have any problem saying this, that the mayor of Fredericksburg was seething over the fact that she had to oversee a recount. She was seething over it. Okay. And I've been in the city council meetings, and she has at times the demeanor of a grade school teacher, scolding, condescending. It's just terrible, absolutely terrible. It is a really poor example of leadership. I was shocked when I saw some of the stuff that came out of her mouth, and how they could actually even sort of rig how the discussions go. But this is not common. This is what they're supposed to do, because they're agents of Saturn. They're agents of Capricorn, and their role is to provide limitation and compression. And our role is to either match it, meet it, or find some other creative way to circumvent what we're experiencing. They're there for a reason. So we go into the election, and we have our good dear friend Laura Presley, who is on our team, and Laura knows this territory backwards and forwards. And she hooked us up with the Secretary of State. We had to call the Secretary of State on 3 occasions during the recount process. We had to call our own independent lawyer to have a conversation with the city's lawyer, because the city's lawyer would not participate or cooperate with us, because it states that we need to be able to get an entire summary of every single process that is connected to the vote, meaning that we've got to get a summary from early voting, absentee voting, all the various summaries, and summaries precinct by precinct. And they have to provide us with copies. And if they don't provide us with copies, then if we make copies ourselves, we can do that. And Laura brought out her copy machine, and the city pushed back, because what they did is they found a gray area. So no, this is what you're getting. Okay, and then we go over and get a phone out and start the phone call, and next thing you know, our lawyer's talking to their lawyer, and then after that conversation, he's whistling a different tune. You see, but it was consistent all the way through that day. And this is the lesson now. And the lesson is this, because I had a really good conversation with Jeanette, and with Jeanette, it was like she was kind of appalled that they wouldn't be supporting the quote unquote democratic process that we were involved in. It wasn't like the mayor went down there and said, "Hey, I got coffee and donuts for everybody. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's be good citizens of Fredericksburg and do this together." Like, when is that really ever going to happen? That's not how the game works. And I'm not criticizing Jeanette, because I think what she's talking about is actually, should be the case, but it's not the case. And so when there's a gray area, this is what I saw again and again and again. Whenever there's a gray area, authority has a default, and the default of the authority is to assert authority. That's the default, for 2 reasons. Number one, they don't want to show you how little they know, because at the end of the day, the mayor didn't know shit. She thought she knew something, but she didn't know anything. Maybe she did. Maybe she thought, well, we can just kind of strong arm these people and get them to just do what we want. But that wasn't the case. So if she was planning on intimidating us and telling us, well, you got to stand over here again, and that didn't work. Right? They tried to put us back in our little, Saturnian boxes. That didn't work. And she got peeved. She was peeved every step of the way. Well, good. She needed to be peeved, because people were making her work for whatever perks she gets out of that job. And she may not get paid, but I guarantee you there's perks. So whenever there's a gray area, authority will assert itself. Now, authority will assert itself anyway, but if there's not a gray area, right, then they have to be cautious, and they have to sort through, where the supposed authority is. And we saw that, especially between the phone call between the 2 lawyers. And once the city's lawyer found out that he could not assert his authority, then he had to relent to our request and give us the documents that we wanted. So this is some of the things that came to my attention. And this is just one city across America, a very small city that is going through extreme growing pains on a number of levels. One of these days I'll do a show, maybe I'll just do a show in Fredericksburg one of these days, because it's a very interesting city in terms of where it's at, and this and the growth that's taking place, and growth in a way that supports a very different kind of society, different kind of civilization, and one that I think bears some scrutiny. Anyway, so there's that. And I think we're at a point now where we can put that to bed. And my advice to anybody who wants to stop fluoridation in your city, I'm going to give you 3 things that you really need to wrap your head around. Number 1, you're going to go up against not only the city, right? You're going to go up against dentists. You're going to go up and you're going to go against their appendages, like the newspaper, who is always going to be advertising for those dentists, you know, in the year ahead. Or is the newspaper going to be advertising with, you know, for Robert Phoenix, astrologer? Probably not. I'm not even sure I'd want to advertise in that newspaper. Maybe some other newspaper, possibly, but not that newspaper. Not even that town. You know, I mean, I love Fredericksburg, but I'm not really sure how being an astrologer would be looked upon there, right? Or even my dear friend Jeanette, who is a photographer, and she has a few small things she does on the side, but works at a restaurant. She's not going to be advertised in the newspaper. So the newspaper is always going to be pretty much in favor of the pro-fluoride forces. So you're going to go up against the city and or the county and the dentists, and the dentists are able to election. The dentist didn't have to go out and go to anybody's house like we did, because the people came to the dentist. We had 13 dentists in town, and they're seeing people from the time that we got on the ballot to the time that the ballots were cast. Every single day they're talking about people. They're talking to people about fluoride, and they got their hands in their mouth, and people are in a place of trauma and trust. Like, oh, you know what's going on here? Oh, you know, tell me about fluoride. Meanwhile, I'm feeling very vulnerable. Open a little wider. Let me tell you about fluoride and how good fluoride is for you. Oh! Right? Yes, fluoride is so good for you. Oh! Mind control. Here, have a little of this nitrous oxide. Isn't that better? Yes. Yes. Let me tell you about how good fluoride is for you. They were doing it. So you're going up against the dentist, you're going up against the city, generally, perhaps the county, you're going up against the newspaper. That's 4. You're probably also going up against, and I hate to say this, but you're probably going up against the Democratic Party, because they love their fluoride, and fluoride is an entitlement. Because, oh, we've got a lot of poor people in this town, a lot of poor people. We need to take care of those poor people. Let's get them as much care as possible. Let's give them the fluoride. Just because the Republicans in Texas, Republican Party is anti-fluoride. They want fluoride out of the water. What do you think the Democrats are going to do? They're going to do the exact opposite of the Republicans want, because that's how they're wired. They can't sit down and say, you know what, these guys might be right on this. No, what they're going to say is, oh, these guys want this. We're going in the other direction. So now you're going to be against the Democrats. Then you're going to go up against the science people. The people that, you know, they may be Republican, they may be Democrat, but they've got science. They've got the secular humanists, the secular humanist scientist type. I encountered a few of those as well. And you're going up against them, who just know the fuck about everything. Wow, look at you. You're superstitious. And how can you believe such a conspiracy theory on this? Right? Oh, that's just backward thinking. You're ignorant. You're uninformed. And so you're going up against them. So these are the people, if you want to get fluoride out of your water, these are the people, these are the forces you're going up against. And to go head on against them, head on against those forces, there's a very good chance you're going to lose. Very good chance you're going to lose, unless you have the demographics in your favor. City like Portland, they went after him. Guess what? They had the demographics in their favor. They had bands like the Dandy Warhols doing benefits to stop fluoridation. That's what they were doing. They're the demographics. Fredericksburg's not quite there yet with the demographics. Maybe in 10 years it might be. Could be. 15 years. But if you want to do this, and this is my thinking about anything now, you want to do anything. If you want to be an agent of change in anything, you cannot go head on. Head on is not a good strategy. If you want to be whatever it is, whether it's fluoride or whether it's this idea that we're living in a simulation. If you go head on, what is the simulation going to do? It's going to bring you resistance. It's going to push you right back. And there's something to learn from that. There's something to learn about dealing with the forces of gravity. There's something to learn from it, right? When we have to meet a test in our lives, there's something to learn. But then there's also this other idea that there's an asymmetric component and an asymmetric strategy that allows people to move in a way that the simulation may not recognize. That they've been, these people are just agents of the simulation. They're just agents of Saturn. And this is what they're trained in. And this is what they know will happen. And so people begin to act out these roles. It's like, we're going to bring the truth, be the truth tellers and the fact providers. And then they're going to move into their roles with their lab coats. And they're going to say, well, you people are wrong. And you people are superstitious. And you people are paranoid. And these are the real facts. And they're going to slam our character. They're going to tell people that we're from out of town and that we're backed by big money from Austin and all this other bullshit, which is what they were spreading throughout this entire election, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Our campaign was really about 3 or 4 people in a core group, 3 or 4 people. We were 3 or 4 people. And we had some support. Don't get me wrong. We had some support. We had, some satellite people that helped us out. Clearly, we had some wonderful people online that donated and allowed us to take out ads and do all, get our signs. And we spent all that money. Everything that was given to us, we spent it all on the election, on the election process. So we were completely alone, right? But there weren't 13 of us who had roughly 6-figure businesses that banded and bonded together to take on this upstart and kind of radical group that was threatening their hegemony. But to that in and of itself is kind of a miracle, really, for us to be able to have gotten that far and have, close to 900 people come out. And when I started with this, I looked at the numbers and I looked at past elections. And in elections like this in Fredericksburg, you might get at the most maybe 1,200 people to come out and vote. And I thought to myself, well, our number, if we're gonna get this thing, and we had 500 signatures that put us on the ballot. And I'm thinking, God, if we get to like the high 8s, or we can put this thing across the goal line, what would happen is that this election, this issue, activated, triggered, motivated so many people to go out and vote that they had to actually send out for more ballots. They were running out of ballots. They kind of had a record turnout. I think we were close to like 2,300 people. And you think, well, 2,300 people, well, that's nothing. In a town of 10,000 people, that's, just a little over 10%. But if you look at past elections, it more than doubled. So at the very least, we motivated enough people to get off their ass and come out and vote. But moving forward, if you want to have some kind of change in your neighborhood or your city or even your life, there's a time where you have to take certain steps. Like we had to take certain steps. We had to get the signatures. We had to get them validated. We had to get them certified. We had to get on the ballot. Those were steps. Like we couldn't just kind of run around and say, turn the fluoride off. Just go ahead and turn it off. We got enough people to say we want it off. We had to go through that. Once we did that, though, our campaign and our strategy needed to be asymmetric. It needed to be asymmetric. We needed to come at them in ways in which they were not going to know how to respond. And I have some ideas around that now, because it took me at least one of these things to get through. I have some ideas around it. I'm not going to tell you all my ideas, but I'll share one with you. I think the best thing that we could have done for at least about 9 months. Well, let's see, we started in, we got on the ballot in June, okay? On the ballot in June. And then in November was the election. On the surface, we shouldn't have done anything until around September, at the most, like middle part of September. And let me give you my reasons why, at least on the surface, right? Because once we got on the ballot, if we didn't do anything, then the dentists who were like, because force meets force, right? They would have said, well, what's up with these people? They got this thing in the ballot, they're not doing anything. and they would have taken this kind of lightly. Instead, we were really organized. We were out there, we were running ads, we're in the parade, we're on radio, we're doing everything in our power. Jeanette's going to these meetings, she's speaking. So they knew we were a threat. They knew. So they had to mobilize. But if they didn't see us as a threat, then they wouldn't have mobilized as much. They still would have been involved. But we don't know anything about these people. It's like, we can't. Now, that's on the surface. On the bottom, below that, we should have been very organized. And we should have been meeting as much as we could with as many, and I'm not from that place, right? I'm kind of new to town, with as many difference makers and groups as possible, right? Meeting key people and sending people out into even quote unquote enemy territory like the Democrats, and having somebody from our group who was kind of aligned in that way and speaking to them in ways that may actually make sense to them, right? The whole different kind of strategy. You know, finding the different health practitioners, bringing them in, saying, this is our strategy. We need to operate, you know, in a very kind of stealth-like manner. Wanting to communicate with your clients, wanting to communicate with your email list. You know, we want you guys to do it. We don't want to be on the surface of things, and there's a reason why. And then later on in the process, right around mid-September, then you hit them with all the ads in the newspaper, right? You just hit them with the ads. Stay out of the newspaper, right? Just stay out of there, because we were pesky to them. They didn't like it. They didn't like it, and they were going to teach us a lesson. That's what they did. So if we're not there, they're like, well, who are these people? I don't know. Well, I wouldn't have to worry about them, at least on the surface. But beneath the surface, we got a whole different kind of program going on. So you have to. This is my opinion, and if you're thinking about doing fluoride in your town, then here's what I highly suggest you do. If you get on a ballot, you do nothing. You do nothing except you meet with the alternative health practitioners in your town and you call a meeting of all of them together. You call, because it's clear alternative health practitioners see this from a very different vantage point. And if there's a health practitioner in your town that you can't trust, then leave them out of the meeting. But you got to qualify these people. You get them together and say, this is what we're doing, and we really need your support. We need your support to talk to your people, and we don't really want to draw a lot of attention to ourselves at this point in time. We want to be kind of an unknown entity. And how you want to be addressing this is kind of matter of fact. Like, you don't want to make a big deal of it, but you want to talk about it. You want to keep things kind of below the surface a little bit. But you've got to make as many connections beneath the surface as possible without drawing a great deal of attention to yourself. And then at a certain point, right, at a certain point, you hold your troops in reserve, and then you bring the big guns out at the end. You also have to do opposition research on your quote unquote opponent, meaning the dentists. You have to know who they are. You have to know what they do. You have to see if they've got any kind of, and I hate this part about politics, but it's part of the game. You have to see if they've got any kind of suits from their patients in their background. You have to be able to do that, because when things hit go, right, they will go after you. They will do everything in their book. They'll do ad hominem attacks. They will slander. They will slam you, and then you have to be ready to push back and say, you know, how can you trust this person in their position on fluoride when they've got, you know, 4 cases that are pending? You know, have they told you about these cases? When you walk into their office, do they tell you that they had an extraction that ended in toxemia and the person was hospitalized for 4 days? Did they tell you about that? Well, what else are they not telling you about? Right, that's the kind of level that you have to be able to go at a certain point. You just have to. You have to. Because they don't have any problem with it. They have no problem at all. So if you're going to do it, you got to know who's in your town and what their business is, and if they've got any red flags in their business. Because at some point that will come You'll have to get in, and you'll have to control the narrative. And that's the final piece. And the piece that I came away with and I continue to come away with again and again and again. Whoever controls the narrative wins. And you don't have to be truthful. You don't have to be truthful. You can have all the truth in the world. And if you're not controlling the narrative, it doesn't matter. And you may have a moral victory. Oh, well, we know it's true. But if you're not controlling the narrative, people are believing that that's the truth. And you can go into some like form of, Christian self-sacrifice, and at some point, they'll wind up having to deal with the facts that they've manipulated the truth, and they'll deal with it one day, either in this lifetime or the other. And that may be true. That actually may be true. But in the meantime, they're making our lives miserable for us, right? So whoever controls the narrative generally wins. And I would say that the dentists and the newspaper controlled the narrative in our town. They controlled it. So in order to launch a successful campaign, you've got to control the narrative. And that means it gets dirty at a certain point. It's just the way it is. You can have all the facts you want in the world. And I've seen it. And some people, we actually moved some people. There were people who appreciated that. And I'm not saying that all people are slaves to their conditioning, because they're not. And for me to be able to if I said that, then I'd be doing them and the process of truth a disservice. And there were some people who were on the fence, and they read the facts and they read the stories, and they said, guess what? I've made up my mind and I'm moving over here. And that does happen, by the way. So that part is still very important. You just can't have it on the surface. What you want to do is you want to be under the radar until you strike. And then when you strike with everything, and you don't know, they don't know what hits them. That's how you do something asymmetrically. That's how you do it. And there's a lot to be said for that with life as well, right? In general. Anyway, let's check in with you guys and see where you're at with what I'm sharing today. Let's see. The best narrative wins. That's right, man. It takes a strong stomach to play in the arena because, Robert, if we're going to do this. Let's see, Shasta, in the North Countries of Georgia, we call this hiding from the dragon. Local government players have already been vetted. Yes. Stealth may be good energy. Still, it's a freaking popularity contest. Most people, this is a really good point that Christine brought up, and I want to address it. And in many cases, she's right. It is a popularity contest. It is, without a doubt. If we had one of the most, before I move into this, I want to give you another example of the harassment that was in play during the election. I told you the story about the guy that went over to this woman's business and told her to take the sign out of her business. He works for the city, right? Well, on a private level, there was a pretty well-known family in town on our side, has a restaurant, decided to put our signs out front. Their workers, the people that sat behind this window and took the orders for burgers and tacos or whatever, they were harassed by people about the sign. Can you fucking believe that? These kids who are just trying to do their job, they're harassing them and traumatizing them because their employer stood by our initiative. So they had to take the signs down. So there you go. That's why you want to do stealth, by the way. Now the popularity contest, unfortunately, is true. If we had somebody in town who's like uber popular, uber rich, and uber powerful, and they're on our side, good. Now you've got a heavyweight in your corner, and the heavyweight can go take on these other people. But from my experience, people tend to be very conservative when it comes to money, paychecks, and customers. And you better either how they accrued their finances and resources, how they accrued it, or how they continue to accrue it. They are into basically not making waves. They don't want to make waves. That's why all these guys in Hollywood had their own little secret society because they were conservative or they had real issues with the powers that be in Hollywood. They didn't want to be known that they were, that they were for the First and Second Amendment. They didn't want to be known that they were into less taxation because they wouldn't get roles. That's why people go underground. So it is a popularity contest to a certain extent. If you have something popular on your side, it's got some resources, man, you're better off. But that's few and far between. That's few and far between. Like if there was somebody who had really big fat resources, let's say they owned about 4 or 5 businesses in town, and they were investing heavily in the newspaper with ads, and they could say, "Hey, look, I saw that editorial you did on the fluoride folks. That was terrible. That was really terrible, and I didn't appreciate it. And that's not what my position is." And if they knew who that person was, and they knew that that person was intrinsic into their advertising model, they'd say, "Oh, well, we're sorry. Yeah, I'd like to meet with you." And now the out of the newspaper, you think he's not going to have a meeting with that guy? Oh, he may say no to us. He may hide out in his office when we come to the newspaper, but is he going to turn down a meeting with that person? Probably not. When he goes there, what do you think that person's going to say? He's going to look, I spend $500,000 a year with you in your newspaper. And I may spend half of that this year. I'm going to stop advertising with you, but I may spend half of that. And I guarantee my business will not suffer as a result of it. So I want you to really rethink what you're doing with this fluoride stuff. Now, the same thing can go in the other direction, and I'm sure that's what happened as well. It's like, we need you to be on board here because we pay you a lot of money to run our ads, And the newspaper, again, they're gonna listen to those people versus a person that works at a restaurant and a guy that has an astrologer with clients that aren't even really in Fredericksburg. They're not going to listen to us. So, Christine, I think to your point, there is a lot of truth to that. But the way that you get around that is you go asymmetric. Let me give you an example why this asymmetric kind of philosophy and strategy is really important, and figure it out in your own life. Like, where can you be asymmetric in your own life? And being asymmetric takes us out of our patterning because we're used to doing things in a certain way. We're used to doing things. So this guy, Malcolm Gladwell, had a short story. Malcolm Gladwell is really interesting. He's really into, thinking, ideas, trends, metrics, finding data points that are unusual, unique. And he talks about a basketball team that was coached here in California, Silicon Valley. And the coach of the team was a guy from India. He didn't really know anything about basketball. And the girls that were on his team, they weren't really that good. I mean, they were maybe average at best. And so he watched the game and he said, well, I don't understand why when this person has the ball, there's only one person on that person. What if 4 people were on that person? Does it make sense that that person would be able to do anything? Like, he saw the game with a different set of eyes. And so he employed that tactic. And guess what happened? They started to win. They started to win, and their games were like, 18-6 or 22-10, or these were not high-scoring basketball games, but they were games in which they were winning, and they started to be very good teams that were very advanced in terms of their athleticism because they had no answer for a simple tactic. The ball gets thrown in, and 4 girls converge around whoever has the ball. You got 5 seconds to get that ball across the half-court line. In most cases, they were either making mistakes, they were able to steal the ball, get an uncontested layup, or there was a whistle. They were so successful at it that they actually had to change the rules for this team so that when they got into the playoffs and the finals, that there was more of an equal playing field where teams that had quote unquote better athletes could take advantage of the rules that were set and that most teams adhere to, except this one team. That's how asymmetric strategies work. And and I'll bring it back to kind of where we are with the South Node in Capricorn, which will only be around until May, the end of May. In June, the South Node then moves into Sagittarius, and the True Node moves into Gemini. So you have a few months to figure this out. The South Node is the chink in the armor. It is a vulnerable place. A vulnerable place. So if you want to, this is where when you're up against Capricornian entities, be asymmetric. Give them nothing to hit. Don't be a target. And I have to look at this in my own life. Like, what do I do here? It's like I get out here and I'm taking on the forces of Capricorn many days. And so I'm even rethinking this for my own, personal consumption and how I transmit my media to you. Look what happened with Henrik. He's gone. Henrik's gone. Red Eyes is gone. Whatever you think about Red Eyes, and I actually like Henrik a lot. His wife, I'm not all that sold on, but I think Henrik's a good dude. And what he did in response to his culture and where he's coming from. And I don't blame him one iota, right? That said, the head-on strategy is a strategy of obliteration. It's a strategy of obliteration. So in order for us to be able to change our position, move, navigate, mitigate, we need to start to think asymmetrically. And that includes yours truly, right here. At the end of the day, that's what will, people say, well, how do you hack the matrix? How do you hack the matrix? You do it asymmetrically. Because the matrix understands and responds to presets, right? The simulation responds to presets. Now, they may ultimately respond to the reset of the preset, right? But that will take some time. That'll take some time. So look at your own life and look at where you are asymmetrically. In your life, what can you do in order to change the game that is different? In a lot of ways, and even when I do this media, I'll say to myself, well, this is what I do. This is what I do. This is how I do it. And even that is something that needs to be looked at and re-examined. And that doesn't even be changing anytime soon per se, but I can see where adjusting the dial. And this is why I'm talking about this today. And I mean, even with some of my later content in the last week or so, you may have noticed that, like, I'm not really talking about Trump all that much. I'm not talking about the fiasco that's going on in Washington, D.C. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm less interested in that because I'm more interested in getting beneath the surface of this experience now and how we're going to navigate through it and how we're going to theoretically hack the simulation, because that's where it's at ultimately. All right, let me check out where you guys are at. Let's see. Henrik's wife was a plant, a handler. Christine, I would tend to agree with that. It's like she's annoying. She's not even compelling. I mean, come on. And there were even times where I felt like she was playing the role of a total cop in a lot of those interviews. Get a bunch of Scorpios, stealth in the person, and together on your next team. Well, I had the Scorpio part, Lynn. Let's see what else we have here. I couldn't work inside the machine. Those are special people trying to undo things inside the belly of the beast. Sheep don't like stepping out from the flock. You're right, Ian. You know why? Because all of a sudden, I talked about this. Once you step outside of the herd, guess what happens? You've got crosshairs on you. That's why people have a herd mentality. Because you have crosshairs on you. You step outside, now you don't have the protection of the herd. You're out there, and all of a sudden, it's open season, right? Okay, what else do we have? You're absolutely right, Ian. Let's see. Da, 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 da. I understand where your leverage is. Leverage. Asymmetric strategy when you're on the short side is based on leverage. Yes, absolutely. Henrik should move to Russia so they can make their enemies' worst fears realize. That's funny. That is funny, Oswald. Oh, please. Robert Mount is a charlatan. He may be a charlatan, but that story is interesting. How can you not appreciate that story? Like, there are people who may be charlatans, but some of their stories are interesting. That's an interesting story. The Malcolm Gladwell story is an interesting story. I don't care if you, I mean, look, I read Blink, and there were some interesting things in Blink, right? He's got some interesting stuff. To do something 10,000 times to become an expert at it is something I actually believe in. When he talks about how intuition is, in a lot of levels, really rarefied intelligence that operates at Mach speed, he's onto something. I don't think you can, like, there are things about Malcolm Gladwell that are probably completely disingenuous. But now we get into the cult of personality. Like, if you look at Jan Irvin thinks Terence McKenna is a complete CAA cutout and sellout. And there are other people who think, well, Terence McKenna has a lot of interesting things to say. Right. So I'm just pulling something from Malcolm Gladwell that I thought was interesting. I'm not worshiping at the church of Malcolm Gladwell. But to look at that story and I say that has merit, it's kind of like saying you don't eat avocados because they're bourgeoisie. Why throw out the avocado? Right? There's something there. There's something there. And even with people that we don't like, right, we can learn from them. Like, even these people in Fredericksburg, they're great teachers. They're great teachers. Like, they've taught me a lot, and I appreciate what they've taught me, just in terms of local dynamics and such. All right, let me move off that. And sorry, I just want to, he could be a fraud. It's still a really good story. And he was the person telling it. Nobody else told that story. So I could take that story and say, okay, makes sense. Makes looking at things from a different perspective. Looking at, again, like him or not, this is what Trump did. Trump said, I'm going to use Twitter, and I'm going to make Twitter my voice, because the mainstream media is not going to give me my voice. And so Trump took an asymmetric strategy. Instead of, going to the Rose Garden press conferences and the Q&As, right? He just said, I'm going to bypass all of that, for better or worse. It was asymmetric. All right, what else am I supposed to be talking about here today? I think there's a few other things that were on my list. Let's see what we have here. And by the way, I just want to say, I want to give a shout out to the state of Texas at a high level, because they made themselves available through our process when it came to fact checking and enforcing the recount rules. Right? They actually at a high level were in our court. Now, they may not be at a high level in other courts, but anyway. All right, let's see. Was there any other stories here that were interesting? Oh, I was going to read you this story about Aubrey Huff, the ex-Major League Baseball star who is teaching kids how to use guns in the event that Bernie Sanders wins the 2020 election and ushers in socialism. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? Now he's raising suspicion, right? Now he's a full-on target. He's a full-on target. Now, there's two things to this. Number one, it can embolden other people to say, you know what, he's right. Maybe we should be able to teach our kids how to use guns, just in case shit hits the fan. He doesn't worry about it. He's not playing Major League Baseball anymore. I'm sure his character is going to be assailed. In fact, it already was. I think Kathy Griffin said something. Here, let me throw this up there. This is the guy I'm talking about. For those of you who welcome socialism to America, read about what happens to a country and its people, tweeted by someone who lived through that nightmare. Maybe teaching your children proper gun safety and how to use one isn't such a bad idea after all. He's absolutely right. Socialism is brutal. But once the socialists come into power, they will stop at nothing to declaw and defang their opposition. It's already happening, by the way. He's right. It's truth. Comedian Kathy Griffin called Huff a dumb fuck for his comments about teaching his kids about guns. Here comes Algol My boys and I were shooting a fake paper target as I was teaching them safe gun practices. Yeah, here's a picture of you holding a fake head of that real Donald Trump murdered by your hand with a knife. How'd that work out for your career? The hypocrisy is strong with this one. I actually like that. I actually like that. Didn't work out very well for Miss Kathy Griffin, now, did it? Although that symbol is quite powerful in terms of the astrology with Trump. So would it be better to be an evangelist, a Paul Revere, a clarion of the truth, or would it be better to be under the radar and not draw attention to yourself and just teach your kids how to use guns? Which one is better? Which one is better? Does one embolden others to do the same? Or do you fly under the radar and just take care of business? Are you that's what I'm looking for. Are you a prophet or are you a hermit? It's dangerous to be a prophet. It's less dangerous to be a hermit. And sometimes you can be both. Prophets speak of things to come. Hermits know of things to come, but they're not out there. They're in their caves and they're taking care of business. So after the shit hits the fan, the hermit can reemerge from the cave. And maybe the two are one and the same. So I wanted to share that with you. Just throw that out there as a rhetorical question. Are you a Paul Revere? Or are you, I don't even know what the equivalent for Paul Revere would be in the Revolutionary War, but somebody who's on the sidelines and kind of in the cave. I've always been out there. I'm probably always going to be out there. It's in my chart. It's who I am. But will I, be able a little more asymmetric? Yeah, pretty good chance. All right, what else did I want to bring up today? Is that it? Oh, yeah. I mean, the other thing too is this NEXVIM stuff. I wanted to talk about the NEXVIM material, but I'm not sure I have enough time for it today. Oh, you know what I do want to talk about today? You know what I do want to talk about? I wanted to talk about Chick-fil-A. I wanted to bring this up. This is really interesting, and I wanted to bring this up because it speaks to hypocrisy with business, and it also speaks to sort of why the fuck are we eating from these fast food restaurants anyway? Now anybody can eat wherever they want. I'm not saying you can't. Like if you enjoy a good Chick-fil-A sandwich, hey, on you, good on you, whatever, right? But here we have Chick-fil-A from the Federalist talks out both sides of its mouth while switching support from Christian to LGBT charities. So there's a guy in Chick-fil-A, and it's Dan Cathy, who's the head of Chick-fil-A. And then there's this other guy, Tim Tassopoulos, and he is the chief operating officer. This is the guy that is now donating to LGBT groups. Maybe because they think that more LGBT people will buy their chicken sandwiches. Or maybe it's because this is ransom. This is paying for the ransom. But here's the deal. Anytime you do stuff with these people, they don't care. They don't give a shit. If you give in to their demands, they respect you less. And that's how that game works. Oh, who is this guy? What does he do? Okay. Join the team. Join the home staff as business consultant in the early 80s, took on responsibilities, raised challenges involving Chick-fil-A restaurants from mall concept into freestanding locations, directed field operations. So this guy's worked his way up. Went to Oglethorpe University, whatever that is. I'm sure it's a fine school. Let's see, what else? Board of Advisors at Georgetown, McDonough School of Business, Board of Trustees, Atlantic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. He's native of Atlanta. So it's not telling us anything about this guy. But he's decided that he's going to be playing for both teams, right? Because they are now donating to a group called Covenant House. Sounds good on the surface, but Covenant House is boasting about its participation in New York City's Gay Pride Parade, Celebrate Pride, blah, 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 blah. Every one of its 16 U.S. Canadian Covenant House programs has undergone the assessment of Cyndi Lauper's LGBT fascist true colors to ensure they are fully on board with the entire homosexual transgender agenda, and there is one. To work there, one must affirm transgenderism and homosexual practice as part of a young person's authentic self. True Colors. Here's the True Colors group. Here it is. True Colors of United, the Inclusion Toolkit. Creating a space where everyone feels welcome can be difficult. What if people don't feel welcome? Like, that's kind of part of life, right? It's part of life. And so what you want to do is you want to migrate to where you do feel welcome, or migrate to where you feel welcome in a different kind of way. It's just how life is. Not everybody has to feel fucking welcome. I'm sorry. Not everybody has to feel welcome. There's not a welcome mat for everybody. I mean, let's just take this to its most possible conclusion. Most possible conclusion. Let's say there is and I'm just going to be very blunt here, okay? Let's say there is a cross-dressing, pedophiliac individual who has a record of having non-consensual sex with minors, and in a way where the minors have wound up in hospitals because of the nature of the non-consensual sex. And yet you're supposed to be able to feel okay and welcome that person. And let's say they want to go into your daughter's bathroom, public bathroom. Oh, they must feel welcome. Not everybody is fucking welcome. I'm sorry. Not everybody's welcome. Not everybody gets a free hall pass. And yet this is the society that we're creating. And oh, those are just minor things. Yeah. You can't. By noticing that, you're actually reaffirming the negative parts, the stereotypical negative. You know, there's something there that is not as damaged as their past might speak of. Aren't you a good Christian? Isn't that what Christians do? Right. So this is what's happening now. I wonder if it's going to come out and bite Chick-fil-A in its ass. Because now, once the true believers find out that Chick-fil-A is donating to Covenant House, and it's just a front for, you know, some sort of LGBTQ extortion or new business, so they're still going to support Chick-fil-A. And if they don't support Chick-fil-A, isn't that what the other side wants anyway, right? It's, oh, look, no, they're moving away from Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A may have to rethink their business strategy. Can they alienate their core audience? You know, this is always what happens. You alienate your core audience as you move on. But the bigger question is, why are we even eating these places anyway? I mean, at one point they were okay for kids to have part-time work, or, you know, if you were a kid, you wanted a job, you know, back in the 70s, you're working at a fast food place. Somebody else was really going to hire you. Those jobs were held down by adults. Fast food places, then you could go and work there. In 5 years, those jobs will be gone anyway. There'll be robots, you know, pooping out your chicken sandwiches. Why are we even eating at these places? I think that's the bigger question. You know, why are we eating these massively farmed, industrially farmed animals, whether it's Chick-fil-A or whether it's Popeyes or KFC or whatever, which is probably hardly even chicken to begin with. That's really the discussion we should be having, not whether or not they're giving their proceeds to a group that secretly works with Cyndi Lauper's, rainbow stormtroopers. So again, here's the debate, right? Here's the debate. Well, really, the debate's another debate. It's another debate entirely about why what the nature and the quality of this food is and what it's doing in a lot of ways to our bodies and to how we actually live and interact. I'm not saying that we can't have restaurants, but maybe we need to rethink these things. But that's not what we're talking about. All right, I think I'm going to get on out of here because I did want to bring that up. I thought that was kind of interesting. to be able to change the discussion around it. It's not about whether this is a good Christian business or not. It's like, is their food ethical? Is their food ethical? Is their practice in serving around their food ethical? That's really the dialogue that we should be having. All right, let me just check in with you guys. See where you're at. AI serving of meats of dubious origin. That's right, Robert. In the victim mentality in the dystopic future, the Nazi opposition created leverage and then using that leverage against us. Don't hurt anyone's feelings. I mean, Pam Anderson that was at the cannibal dinner. Ooh, say more. Say more about that. I had a former worker, this is Michael, I had a former work colleague joined their real estate team. Oh, the interview review process took over 9 months. Seemed like something out of the CIA HR handbook. Wow, that's interesting. Let's see. Hermits store the guns. Get to know your hermits. Where we see it in charts. Hermits, 12th house, 8th house. And that's the first part of the show. NEXVIM connections to Lyndon LaRouche movement. Ooh, that's interesting. That's worth a show. That is worth a show for sure. I saw something about that with the Lyndon LaRouche movement. I did see something about that. Now that you mention it, I did see something about that. Hey, everybody. Hi, Diana. Yeah, just a little bit later today. Largest purchaser of Sunkist lemons in the country, too. Chick-fil-A founder died fairly recently. Wasn't that interesting? Let's see. Shasta says, lived in Georgia for 20 years. Chick-fil-A was real strong in Atlanta. They to this day refuse to avoid MSG in their food. So Shasta, they said they put MSG in their food. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Most can't work out how the HOB works. Let's see. Anything else? Imagine the politician running on any fluoride. What's really interesting, Steve, is that we had this troll come into our Facebook page, and he was dissing us about, oh, look at these mind control, fear mongering people, blah 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 blah. The guy's from Kentucky. That's what it says. He's from Kentucky, a place called Paducah, Kentucky. I don't even went to his Facebook page. He's a bartender at a sports bar in Paducah, Kentucky, and he's on our webpage dissing us. Okay, well, that's fine. You can come there. You can diss us. But first of all, you're from fucking Kentucky. That's number one. Stay the fuck out of our water. I'm not telling you what you should consume in Paducah, Kentucky. I'm not on your webpage, your Facebook page, telling you how to live. All right? This is a local issue. Stay the fuck out. You can have a voice on it, but your voice doesn't really count. If you lived in Fredericksburg, your voice would count a lot more. Secondly, I did a little search for your state of Kentucky, and there are a number of your lawmakers that actually want fluoride out of the water in Kentucky. Oh, did you know that? Yeah, well, and I put a link in there. Why don't you go talk to them and call them the same names that you called us? Let's see how that goes. Let's see how much internet courage you have. Let's just see how much internet courage you have. Probably not as much. Just saying. Just saying. Anyway. It's funny how people are, right? Funny. 12th house. Let's see. Pam was on the Chicks Kick years back. Wouldn't surprise me if she was at Cannibal Dinner. Yeah, Pam. She does. She just has MK Ultra written all over, doesn't she? She's got that. And on whatchamacallit, Baywatch, they're wearing those beach bikini the Babylon beach bikini outfits, right? All red. It's like the horror Babylon in a bikini. That's what those bikinis were about in a lot of ways. She was theoretically discovered, by the way, at a football game in Vancouver, Washington. She's a Canadian. And I believe it was at the BC Lions game. and they put her face up. They found her theoretically in the stands. They put her face up in the stands, and she looks quite a bit different than she does now, but she's very attractive. And then apparently somebody from Molson saw her picture, and she became a Molson's girl. That's how Pam Anderson theoretically got her start. Okay, I'm out of here. I'll be back tomorrow. Do more content. And tomorrow it's about Thanksgiving. Obviously, it's one of my favorite holidays. I love Thanksgiving. Whether or not it's real, I don't really care. It's in the time of Sagittarius. It's bountiful. It's about counting your blessings. It's my favorite. One of my favorite holiday. Number one is Thanksgiving. Second favorite holiday happens to be Easter, that time of year. Christmas, not so much. I love Thanksgiving. So tomorrow brings, let's give thanks for what we have in our lives. It's not a bad thing to do. Before I go today, I've been wanting to say something and just trying to find the right moment and time to say this and to share it. Last week, I got a text from a very, very dear friend and a very dear friend of the show. And the text I got was one of those texts that it was just seismic. And the text was that her son died. And when I read the text, I was simultaneously stunned and not shocked. It was very odd, and I don't want to get into why, but it was the weirdest feeling to read those words and to see those words. It's in some ways not be surprised. It was very, very odd, and what was not odd was her pain and her loss, and we actually spent a few moments together, having a bit of a cry, talking about what happened. A very young man, 36 years of age, and I just want to say, straight up, Louise, I know that you're not present in our chat room, but you watch all the shows, and you and I talk, and I just wanted to mention to you that that I love you, and that I know that there are people in the chat who are a very similar spirit. If they met you, they'd love you too, and that we're all in this together. And so when one of us loses somebody, it's meaningful. It's very, very meaningful. And I hope that your dear boy is in a very different place now, and in a good place. And of course, I'm thinking about you, and wishing you nothing but peace for you and your family as a result of your loss and your son's transition to another place. And I could say the same thing for another member of the show, who's not really involved, but Adrian, the same thing. My heart goes out to you as well. I didn't really talk about your experience, but again, another mother losing their child. So I'll include you in this as well, Adrian. Same deal. So to all you mothers and all you fathers out there, or all you uncles and all your aunts, love your little ones, even if they're not so little. Do your best to love them up. This is not a given. Every day brings us something new, and sometimes the something new that comes in our path is shocking, and it really can be devastating. So, part of the gratitude moment, just give thanks for who's in your life, and especially the ones that you really hold close to you. Give them an extra hug. All right, I'm out of here. This is Robert Phoenix. 15 minutes of flame. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to see what's possible. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.